This video is about issues I've been experiencing for the last several weeks on my 2021 Beta 300RR Race Edition. The bike currently has around 500 miles and 29 hours of run time on it. The problems first began on a Saturday afternoon shakedown ride in preparation for the Perry Mountain Dual Sport ride in Alabama. After a couple hours riding, the bike began dying on the downhill sections, but would generally restart. I initially thought it was a fueling problem and the pilot jet was clogged. I disassembled the carburetor, cleaned the pilot jet, and the bike ran fine. The next ride was Perry Mountain Dual Sport ride in Alabama. The bike ran fine for nearly 3 hours and then stopped after a long, slow single track section and would not restart. We had to push the bike out of the woods and up to an area where we had some tools. I suspected maybe I had contaminated fuel, so I cleaned the carburetor again, was able to restart it and ride back to camp. Before the next ride at Brushy Mountain, North Carolina, I emptied all the fuel out and replaced the pilot jet. As you can see in the video, that did not cure my problems. At Brushy, we determined that it wasn't a fuel problem, but an ignition issue. The OEM battery was trashed, and I replaced it with an anti-gravity restart battery. The jury is still out on the anti-gravity restarts, but that's another issue. I also replaced the ignition coil and checked the stator and the rectifier regulator. All of these components were within spec. I was certain that changing the battery and the ignition coil would cure the problem. So test rode the bike again at Highland Park. Had exactly the same issues. It was time to get really serious about this. I checked the ignition trigger resistance and it was 12 ohms cold, and the ignition trigger stator coil was 100 ohms. Beta also sent me a new ECU unit to try. The next ride I packed an inductive spark tester so I could quickly tell if the ignition had spark. I also packed a spare ECU and my trusty Fluke 77. The problem was still there and getting worse. When it died, I rechecked the ignition reading to see if maybe the high temperatures were causing an open circuit in the trigger coil or the ignition trigger. I replaced the ECU and still had no spark. I had to wait about 30 minutes and then the spark would magically reappear. I'd nearly run out of ideas. I rode back to the truck and decided I'd take an extra plug, pull the plug wire off when it stopped, and see if I had spark outside the combustion chamber. I left the bolts out of the tank so I could remove it quickly to pop the plug cap off and tried a new spark plug. On that ride, the bike never quit. It continued to run fine the rest of the afternoon. Back at the truck, I had a pretty good idea of what the problem was. Pulled the tank off, ran my fingers down the wiring harness, and felt a small hole abraded through the vinyl jacket on the main wiring harness where it crossed between the tank and the radiator. When I got home, I cut into the wiring harness. I found the reds were burned nearly in two, the wires to the kill switch were burned, along with the map switch wiring, plus damage to some of the other wiring between the ECU and the odometer. The harness had been routed over the edge of the radiator and was pinched between the gas tank and the radiator. My theory is that going downhill, my weight shifted forward, putting pressure on the harness, grounding it to the radiator, compounded by the expansion of the radiator when it was hot, causing a short in the circuits. When the engine cooled off, the radiator would contract and would clear the short. That's how the bike would restart. I've patched the wiring harness back together and Beta is sending me a replacement. I still haven't heard back from Beta on the proper routing for the harness. It seems to fit fine between the radiator and the frame, but it lies on top of the radiator hose clamp with the sharp edges. It really looks like it should be routed under the radiator hose, but I'm not sure if the wiring harness is long enough to do that. I can't thank Gerald Jones at UpState Cycle in Greenville, South Carolina, and Beta for all their help. They sent me wiring diagrams, they sent me troubleshooting diagrams, quickly got me the parts to try, and these folks really stand behind their product. Thanks for watching, and I hope this video helps anyone else with a similar problem. Please leave a comment if you're so inclined. Ride safe.